What you can't dispute, Bassem, is that clearly since 2005, Hamas has spent a fortune of money they could have spent differently with their people. They spent it on this sophisticated and extensive tunnel system.
The tunnel system that is bigger than the New York subway system?
It would appear so.
450 miles?
I don't know. Do you know how big it is?
450. I mean, nobody.
You know?
I think if there's 450 miles underneath the tunnel, we have seen droves and droves of tunnels. What we have seen is small rooms, very, very.
So you don't believe that there is?
No, I don't. No, I don't believe. Of course there are tunnels, but I don't believe that there are like 450 miles because that's ridiculous.
Did they serve their people though, with how they spent their money?
I'm not sure. I don't know. The thing is, like, there's a lot of propaganda. I don't know how much they spend on themselves. I don't know how much they spend on the tunnels. I don't know how much they spend on the people. But the thing is, these are all side talks.
Yeah, they could be bad people. They could be horrible people. They could be corrupt people.
Could be or are.
They are. Okay? They are horrible. They are vampires.
But do you believe that? Or are you just saying that for performative reasons?
No, I'm saying that because, again, I don't want to go and find the FBI at my door.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Greybush Middle East Productions video. I'm your host, Greybush, and today's video is about a debate that took place a few days ago between television host Piers and an Egyptian gentleman by the name of Bassem Youssef. Apparently, Mr. Youssef is a comedian, although I haven't really heard much of his act. But what I have heard from Bassem, I could hardly describe it as being funny, in my personal opinion. Now, what I gathered from this debate is a little bit shocking, but it wasn't something that took me completely by surprise. Because Bassem's position isn't unique, and in fact, it's fairly ubiquitous in the Muslim Arab world and in the world in general. A lot of people are actually pushing the same narrative Bassem pushes. Okay, now I fully understand that people are angry at what Israel is doing in Gaza. That's understandable. They're angry about how Israel is prosecuting the war against Hamas, and that's perfectly reasonable. Arguments could be made that Israel isn't targeting Hamas precisely enough. That criticism is valid, and it's subject to debate, of course. Nobody can dispute that the optics coming out of Gaza, the widespread destruction of buildings, and the horrific images of dead civilians are terrible for Israel, and they're terrible for anybody who cares about the deaths of innocent people. It's a terrible thing. So people can argue who's more responsible for those things, if it's Israel or if it's Hamas. But something that can't be disputed at all by anybody who's serious about the subject is that Hamas committed horrible atrocities on a massive scale on October 7th. And how do we know they did that? We know they did that because they videotaped themselves doing it, okay? They videotaped themselves doing it, and then they published it to the world. So while a lot of social media sites have taken it down, the fact is that people still have copies of these videos. And they exist, and the public has seen many of them. And what the public sees is Hamas terrorists murdering innocent people, helpless innocent people with machine guns and grenades in horrible fashions, and them celebrating it, laughing hysterically, enjoying the moment. They really enjoyed their murder and their rapes. They would scream, "God is great," while they were doing it. There's videos of Hamas terrorists calling their mother and father to brag about how many Jews they killed. Mama, I just killed 10 Jews. And the mother, she's celebrating with them, saying, "God is great. God is great. You're a hero." So this can't be disputed at all. And it also can't be disputed that these atrocities were almost uniformly celebrated throughout the Muslim world, Muslim and Arab world. They were celebrated. Okay, not all of them, obviously. A good cross-section of the Muslims and Arabs, the more moderates, were disgusted, to be fair. But those voices were completely dwarfed by the degree of elation coming from the Arab Muslim world when they learned about October 7th and the fact that over 1,000 Israelis Jews were murdered and raped, and another 250 were taken as hostages, and those hostages included month-old babies and 90-year-old Holocaust survivors. Nonetheless, Bassem Youssef seems to believe that those atrocities did not happen, and that they were completely made up and over-exaggerated by Israel, and that Israel did that so they could go in and commit what he believes are atrocities against Palestinian civilians. So let's get into the debate and see what Piers and Bassem have to say, and I will give my commentary about how the debate's going, who I think's winning. So let's get into it.
Do you categorize what Hamas has been doing, particularly on October the 7th, what Hezbollah did within hours of October the 7th and carried on for the next year, what the Houthis have done, a lot of it orchestrated by, doubtless, the Iranian regime. Do you categorize that as resistance, as freedom fighting, or are there elements of all those groups who are genuinely terrorist in their thinking?
Oh, someone's a terrorist is other one's.
Yeah, but how you categorize it?
How I categorize it? I mean, like, I'm an American citizen. Of course, I don't want to come back and find the FBI raiding my house. So yes, of course, they're terrorists.
Did you believe that?
Well, at the advice of my lawyer, I would say.
Well,
they're terrorists.
I don't think you'd be banned from going back to America.
You know what happened to Scott Ritter? He was the former UN inspector of nuclear weapons in Iraq.
He's a convicted pedophile.
Yeah, but when he was raided a few months ago, it was because he was talking against Israel. Asa Winstanley, he was a British journalist in London, and his house was raided just last week because he talked about Israel. And this is actually, Piers, what I like about you is that you are a fierce warrior against cancel culture. Right?
Yeah.
If you cancel people for their opinion, we're not living in a free world anymore, right?
I totally agree.
So, for example, you have Robert Saleh, who was the coach of the NFL Jets. He wore like a small Lebanese flag, and he was canceled. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. I came to America, and I was so happy that I can speak about anyone I want. And then suddenly it's like, oh, we can do whatever you want, unless if it's like.
It is. I mean, it's tangible to me when I go to America, far more than it is in the UK, for example. The support for Israel is pretty rock solid in terms of their political class, in terms of much of the media, if not all of the media. It's more tangible in America than it is in most other countries.
Yeah.
Including here.
Yeah.
A lot more criticism of Israel here than there is in America.
Yeah, and yet you have Israel having a crazy control on the political apparatus, whether in America or in here. I mean, 13 out of 25 of the labor cabinet here are funded by Israeli lobbies. 126 out of 355 MPs are funded by Israel. I mean, out of those 13 members of cabinet is the prime minister himself, his counselor, his deputy, the home secretary, the foreign secretary, and the secretary of the treasury, who oversees the arms shipments to Israel. So I don't understand why. I mean, I think we should talk about that more about anything, because that is actually what gives Israel the cover for what they're doing.
Okay, so you heard the question that Piers asked, right? It was a pretty simple and straightforward question. It was, do you categorize Hamas and Hezbollah as resistance fighters or as terrorists? And Bassem said, yes, they're terrorists, but he said it sarcastically and with a giggle. And Piers asked, well, are you being serious, Bassem? And then Bassem proceeded to explain why he wasn't serious. He said his lawyer told him to say what he said because otherwise he'll be thrown into prison. And as an example of that he'd be thrown into prison if he calls Hamas or Hezbollah freedom fighters. Yeah, so the argument he's making is if he is to call Hamas and Hezbollah freedom fighters instead of terrorists, he'll be thrown in prison by the authorities. And the implication was that's because Jews control the authorities. And he gave two examples. He said, look at Scott Ritter and look at Asa Winstanley. And it's true, both of those people did have their homes raided, I believe. Ritter was in the United States, so he was raided, I believe, by the FBI. And Asa Winstanley was raided, I believe, by the British authorities a couple weeks ago also. But neither had anything to do with talking down on Israel. Not at all. Scott Ritter is somebody who advocates strongly on behalf of Putin, on behalf of Xi, on behalf of Iran. There's no confusion there. And he travels to Russia often, and to talk to Russian people at Sputnik and RT News. And in the United States, we have a law. It's a federal law. It's called the Foreign Agents Registration Act. They call it FARA. And what FARA says is, if you're being paid by a foreign agent to spread their message, be their mouthpiece in the United States, you can. That's perfectly fine. But all you have to do is register yourself with the government that you are in fact a foreign agent. And the reason for that is national security. The United States wants to know who is inside the country working for foreign governments, and that's perfectly reasonable. So Scott didn't register as an agent, but obviously the FBI has put together a whole bunch of evidence that points in the other direction, that shows he is in fact working for the Russians. How do I know this? I know this because when the federal government raids you and then later indicts you, now I don't believe Mr. Ritter has been indicted yet, but once the federal government indicts you, the conviction percentage, I believe, is at least 99%. And the reason for that is the federal government doesn't mess around with weak cases. When they bring a case against you, you better plead out or you better leave the country, because they got you. And what the FBI did is they raided Scott's house and they took, 100 boxes of documents, and they took his computers and his electronic devices. And my guess is that pretty soon they will indict him. And once that happens, he's going to be going to prison. So that's Scott Ritter. Had nothing to do with Jews. Asa Winstanley also had nothing to do with Jews while he was raided. The British government raided him and took his electronic devices for possible violations of the Terrorism Act of encouraging terrorists. So what he exactly did or did not do, I'm not sure, but I can guarantee you it had nothing to do with talking poorly about Israel. You can talk poorly about Israel all you want in England, in America, in Western democracies, because we have this thing called freedom of speech. And that's what sets us apart from the other people. For example, if you were in Iran and you were to talk down about Khomeini, he'll put you to death. There's no problem. They put to death hundreds, thousands of people a year just for talking badly about the regime. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I believe I have another cold. So bear with me. So then, Piers tries to rein him back in, says, well, you're not answering the question. I asked you, who's a terrorist? Are Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists, right? He avoids the question, and Bassem avoids the question again. He says, well, America controls England and America controls the United States. And he starts listing off the number of people, government employees in the legislature, in the cabinet, who receive funding from Israeli sources. And he says that's proof. But this isn't answering the question. He's dodging the question, people. The question is about Hamas and Hezbollah. It's not about our people in the United States or England being controlled by Jews. You can debate those things if you want, but that's not the question. And the reason why he's not answering the question is because he knows the answer, and it's that they are, in fact, terrorist organizations. So I think Ritter tries to, rein him back in again, and then Bassem just says, well, if I talk bad about Jews, I'll be canceled. And, Jews create cancel culture, and Jews are bad, Jews are bad, Jews are bad. So what is Bassem's answer to the question? It's basically, Nazi blood libels, tropes, Israeli Jewish tropes. Jews control the world. Jews are responsible for all the problems. Jews will throw you in prison if you talk bad about them. That's Bassem's answer. That's what it was. Not a very good answer. Let's move on to the next clip.
That they should actually stop the humanitarian aid in Gaza. But let's talk about how, I understand the thing, if you gave them a state, it would be rewarding terrorists, right? And we understand, I have to be fair. I know that a lot of Arabs will hate me for saying this, but terrorism has been actually going in the Middle East for a very long time. Do you remember the bombing of the King David Hotel? 92 British soldiers were killed. The bombing of the Cairo Haifa train, over 200 soldiers, British soldiers killed. The assassination of Volker Bernadotte, Lord Moyen, all done by Israeli Zionist militias. They were the terrorists, and they were rewarded of having their own state. So I don't understand the double standard. As a matter of fact, one of the people who were in these terrorist attacks was Isaac Shamir, and he was on a terrorist list, English terrorist list, and he couldn't come to London until he became a prime minister. But to be fair, the Israeli government at the time, 1949, have actually declared the Stern gang as a terrorist group, and they arrested 2 of them, and they gave them very, 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 very severe sentences, 8 and 5 years.
So I guess this is Mr. Youssef's version of comedy, being bluntly sarcastic and then continuing to avoid the question and completely bumble the facts of well-documented historical events. So again, the question is, are Hamas freedom fighters are terrorists? And Bassem's now continuing to ramble on, and his response is, I'm not going to answer your question. Israel is the terror state. His argument is that Israel was in fact awarded with statehood for terrorist acts and nothing else. His evidence, he points to Cairo-Haifa train bombing and the King David Hotel attack. But Bassem's problem is that he's highly uninformed about the facts surrounding both attacks. For instance, Bassem says the Cairo train bombings killed 200 British soldiers. Now, big surprise, that's completely false. The Cairo train bombings killed a total of 28 British soldiers and approximately 40 Palestinians. In reality, there was 2 separate attacks on 2 separate dates. One month where the 28 British soldiers were killed, and then a month later, which killed the 40 Palestinian Arabs. And the Cairo-Haifa train bombings were in fact revenge by the Lehi, which is a Jewish terrorist organization, actually registered as a terrorist organization by Israel and condemned by all Jewish politicians. It was a revenge attack for the Ben Yehuda street bombings in Jerusalem during the Civil War times, 47 and early 48. And the Ben Yehuda street bombings were actually a series of attacks ordered out and carried out by Palestinian Arabs. Some of them suicide bombers, and they killed Jewish targets all up and down Ben Yehuda Street from February 48 onwards. Ben Yehuda Street was a major thoroughfare, and these attacks killed approximately 60 Jews. But what really angered the Jewish people, they expected it from the Arabs, that was no surprise, but what really angered the Jews is that it wasn't only carried out by Arabs, but it was also carried out by ex-British military fighters. And what vehicles did they use? They used British military vehicles, armored trucks, a number of them for these attacks. So that really pissed off the Jews, and they decided to take revenge, and that revenge turned out to be the Cairo-Haifa train bombings. As for the King David Hotel bombing, Bassem also falsely claims that it resulted in the deaths of 92 British soldiers. Now again, that is false. It did kill 90 people, but it was a broad mix of people, and in fact killed about 20 Jews, a handful of soldiers, and a handful of innocent bystanders as well, for a total of 90 people. Now you have to understand that the King David Hotel bombing was in response to what the British military called Operation Agatha, and it was known as Black Saturday for the Haganah, the Jews. And what happened was the British stole a bunch of documents, and allegedly those documents linked the Haganah to the Jewish insurgency against Britain. And so the Irgun obviously wanted to destroy those documents. I'm assuming those documents did link the Haganah to the insurgency. That wouldn't surprise me. So the Irgun wanted to destroy those documents, but the Irgun did not want to kill anybody in those attacks. Proof of that is that we have a lot of evidence that the Irgun notified numerous people at the hotel, at the police, at the Palestinian newspaper that the bombs were there, and they said, leave the building if you want to live. For one reason or another, either that message didn't get relayed to the proper person, I'm unsure, you'd have to research it yourself, but they didn't evacuate, and many people died in the ensuing explosion. So that was that. Now, what Bassem also didn't mention was how the Jewish political leadership responded, okay? They immediately denounced the King David Hotel as a despicable terror attack. And the Jewish agency said, and I quote, Their feelings of horror at the base and unparalleled acts perpetrated today by a gang of criminals. The Jewish National Council denounced the bombings. David Ben-Gurion deemed the Irgun the enemy of the Jewish people after the attack. The Hatzafeh, a Jewish newspaper in Palestine, labeled the Irgun fascist terrorist. Okay, so this just shows Bassem's lack of understanding of the events he's discussing, because they're far different than what Hamas did on October 7th. Don't be confused. The two attacks that Bassem raised are about two separate Jewish terrorist organizations, the Lehi and the Irgun. Irgun were also called the Etzel. Both of these groups were, condemned by the leading Jewish politicians and later registered as terrorist organizations when Israel was founded in 48. Compare that to October 7th, where it was the actual government, the Hamas, the government of the people of Gaza, who conducted these attacks. And these attacks were actually, they weren't condemned by the people of Gaza. Rather, the contrary happened. They were celebrated as an act of and the will of God, of Allah. Allah willed this to happen, and they were dancing in the streets when they heard of this stuff. Nobody said this is terrible. Nobody. Not a word. So Bassem is just, he's a running dog from, the simple question about does he believe Hamas are freedom fighters or are they terrorists? And the reason for this is pretty obvious, right? He believes that Hamas are actually great freedom fighters and not terrorists. He just won't come out and say that, I guess he's too much of a coward, but he won't come out and say these are great freedom fighters. Rather, his choice is to deny that they're terrorists indirectly by pointing his finger at the evil Jews and calling them the real terrorists. Because if the Jews are the real terrorists, well, the logical conclusion is that Hamas are in fact the good guys. They're the freedom fighters. It's not really complex what Bassem's doing, but he won't answer the question. And that's because I guess he doesn't want to voice his clear support for Hamas. I mean, who would, right? They are a despicable terrorist organization, not only founded upon the killing of Jews, but one, wed to the destruction of their own people in Gaza. To them, to Hamas, the lives of Palestinians are far less important than the objective of killing Jews. And I'm not coming to this conclusion on my own. This is what Hamas has come out and said to the world, right? Just look at what Sinwar and Hania publicly said before they were killed, right? Hania said Hamas requires the blood of women, children, and the elderly. Okay, Hamas requires their blood. Okay, imagine if the Jews came out and said killing the Palestinians required Jewish blood. It would just be all over the news. But this stuff wasn't really published by the media. It was kind of cast aside. It wasn't reported by many, right? In Sinwar, what did Sinwar say? Sinwar said specifically, the dead children and women of Gaza, the more that they die, the better things will be for Hamas. So again, this isn't my opinion, people. This is how Hamas themselves look at the situation. To them, Palestinian lives aren't, worth very much. Not only they are not worth very much, but Hamas requires that they die. Hamas requires their blood. Okay. So let's go to the next section and see what else Bassem and Piers have to say.
Do you see any blame on your side for any of this going back to 1948?
Yeah.
Genuinely, I'm not after a satirical response. Genuinely, when you look back at the history of this conflict, one of the most powerful pieces I've read actually about all this, or one that I just thought was very interesting, was a Jewish journalist called Jonathan Friedland at The Guardian. And he wrote a column where he said he could make a very powerful argument, both for Israel and for the Palestinians, in which he could present a case that they were the more overriding victim of this whole conflict.
I'm aware of Jonathan Freeland.
What's your view of him?
Well, everybody knows he's a liberal Zionist. He's one of the most outspoken people in defending Israel. But
he wasn't. But my point was, he said that he could construct a case for Palestinians to have a genuine right to feel aggrieved.
You know what else?
Can you do the same the other way?
You know what else he said? He said Israel has a very difficult choice of if they continue doing it in Gaza or not doing it in Gaza. All we can do is just acknowledge it and see it. And this is very privileged because he can do it because he's on the stronger side. And this is the thing. It's like, we can acknowledge it, we see it, it's so bad, we're killing civilians, but what we can do? And then we raise our hands at the end and say it's too bad, it's inevitable, war is so bad, it's bad. But to your point, Yeah, I think the Palestinians had done a grave mistake for not accepting the settlement that they were given by the UN partition. I mean, they were given 47% of their land. And I mean, let's go back. The Balfour Declaration was 1917. At the time, there were 60,000 Jewish people living in a 700,000 population, which makes them 8%. That number jumped from 8% to 30% after the Second World War and the Holocaust. Now, imagine yourself being a Palestinian, you're having all of these refugees coming to you, and then they're forming gangs and stealing your land and killing you. And then the UN said, like, I know what we can do. I'm going to give the people who just arrived 30 years ago 53 of the land, and I'm going to give the people who are already there, who form 70%, 47%.
But there are also, so I would say to you, there are also hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who were displaced from their homes in Arab countries. So was that wrong?
Well, I advise that you read Avi Shloim, who is a Jewish Iraqi, and he also, I think he's also British. That's not the timeline. The timeline was...
It is true, though.
Yeah, but that's not the timeline. The timeline is important. The timeline was the Zionist gangs, they were killed, they raped, they stole land, and then they basically evicted the people out of their land. And overnight, 750,000 Palestinians was displaced. Overnight. Over the few years, of course, now Israel is now the enemy. And there was a lot of rise of nationalism and yes, in some countries, that happened. But like,
But was that wrong, is my point?
Of course, but like, it is not the whole thing.
What I'm trying to do, and I'm not trying to trap you or trick you.
No.
I'm just trying to get you to concede that in a period since 1948, there have been things on both sides. I'm not trying to equivocate either. I'm just trying to get you to, I understand completely everything you've said and are going to say about Israel, and you're very implacable about that, and you have every right to be, so I get that. But can you find criticism of your own side in this argument, going back to 48, proper criticism, where things have been done differently, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are?
Okay, so if you are British and you had 1 million Ukrainian arriving to your home, and then over 30 years, that number increased to 30% of the population, and then the UN gave you less than half of your country, wouldn't you fight? Wouldn't you resist? But now it's
That wasn't my question.
What was your question?
Whether you can find anything to criticize since 1948.
Give me something to criticize.
No,
I mean, there's a lot to criticize.
You know the history better than anybody.
There is a lot to criticize. Of course, there's a lot of mistakes. I mean, the Middle East has been plagued by a lot of the military dictatorship, of course. I mean, but having mistakes we should not be penalized by having our land taken away from us just because the other side is stronger, right? Because what are you telling your kids? If you're strong and you have enough arms and weapons, you can take whatever land you want. That's not why the UN was formed. That's not why the Security Council was formed.
So Piers tries his best to rein Bassem back in. You know, he says, well, do you see any blame on your side at all going back to 1948? So that's a lot of time. You know, we're talking about 75 years in the history. If he can find anything wrong with the Arab position, what they've done over 70 years. Piers says, please give me a serious answer. I understand you're being sarcastic, satirical. Just give me a straight answer. This is a serious conversation, right? So what does Bassem respond with this time? Big surprise, right? More sarcasm, more question dodging, more finger pointing, more denying. This time he starts to discuss UN Resolution 181. And he said, first he says, yeah, the Arabs, what mistake did the Arabs make? They should have accepted it. But of course he doesn't mean that. He's not being serious. And he then, follows up and explains all the reasons why they made the correct choice in refusing to have their own state in 1948. In 1948, see, first they refused their own state in 36 in the Peel Commission, where they were offered 80% of the land. They said no. In 48, UN Resolution 181 passed, the United Nations, okay? They're good friends of the Arab people, said, we'll just split it down the middle, 50%. 50-50. What did they say? They said, screw off, we want to drive you into the sea. And they immediately started a war where 5 Arab nations all tried to wipe Israel off the map. Okay? So here's Bassem defending the very decision that has led to this constant state of war and death and destruction of Gaza and the Arabs in Gaza. He's defending the decision that has led to all this death. How absurd is that? If the Arabs accepted 181 back in 48, there would have been peace in the entire Middle East since 1948. And the Palestinian state would be flourishing right now. It would be the Singapore of the Middle East. It would be right next to Israel in leading the world into the future. But they said no. They said no, they want war. They want to blow Israel and the Jews off the map. And Bassem is defending that decision, saying it was the right decision. You ask the people of Gaza, you go there today, and you say, hey, do you think your grandparents made the right choice back in 48? When they just, refused having their own state? Is that a good choice? Let me tell you, you'll get 100% across the board regret. And why wouldn't they regret it? Why wouldn't the people of Gaza not regret what their grandparents refused to accept? Statehood. What they're apparently dying for right now, their parents were offered it on a plate. And now they're fighting and dying for what their parents had on a plate. It's just so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. It's hard to put into words. And it's real despicable stuff coming from Bassem. He's showing his true colors. Bassem is Hamas, okay? He's Hamas. He is the Hamas mentality. To him, he cares more about killing Jews than the lives of Palestinians. Because he's not saying that, it was a mistake for not accepting their own state. That was the right choice. What's happening right now is all the right choice. The Arabs they've never made a mistake. And every time they're dying, it's the right choice. Their death is the right choice. The destruction of Gaza by Hamas is the right choice. Okay? So you might call me, a radical, a racist, a Nazi for calling Bassem Hamas. But Bassem is Hamas. Bassem is Hamas. And if he cared about the people of Palestine, he would tell them two things. Return the hostages and reject Hamas. Because those two conditions need to be met if they're going to have peace. I'm just being realistic with you guys. This isn't like some crazy concept here. If they want peace, they have to give the hostages back and reject Hamas. And Israel will be willing to provide them with peace. Because it's ridiculous. There's the whole idea that they're going to defeat Israel militarily, okay? That's not happening, people. Welcome to the real world. Israel isn't only a vastly superior military, far more superior than all the Arab nations combined, as you can see today, but they're backed by the number one superpower in the world, the United States of America. And people say, Israel controls America, or, Jews control America. Who cares who controls who? They're allies. The United States and Israel are two of the strongest allies on the face of the earth. And they're going to support each other when it comes to, somebody wanting to annihilate them and destroy one of them. And guess what? The Hamas, the Hezbollah, the Iran, the Khomeini, the Ayatollahs, they don't only want to destroy Israel. They want to destroy the United States of America. And they don't hide this, people. They don't hide it. Israel is only the little Satan. Listen up. I'm not making this up. They say it in the streets. Israel is only the little Satan. Who's the big Satan? United States of America. So when people say, the United States is doing this, they're just so stupid for helping these Jews. The Jews are just using the Americans. Bullshit. The Jews aren't exploiting or using the Americans, and the Americans aren't being exploited by the Jews. The Americans are looking out for their own asses by defeating the enemies who want to defeat them and destroy the United States of America. United States of America, okay? Wake up. The United States is fighting their enemies in the Middle East, not Israel's enemies. Yes, Israel's enemies, but also the enemies of the United States of America. And so why is Bassem doing this? He's not a dumb man. He's obviously a highly intelligent man. Why is he taking this extreme position? Is he deluded? Is he lying to himself? I don't know. What it sounds like to me, though, is that he's so filled with hatred and rage, which is understandable, even though he's Egyptian and he has no, dog in the fight, because the Palestinians are not Egyptians. They're not Jordanians. That's the story they're telling you. So why do they all have, Bassem, I believe, is married to a Palestinian. I believe he's got family in Palestine. So he's so filled with rage that he can't even see straight. That he's lying to himself. He's telling himself that the Arabs have made the right choice since 1948 to choose war with Israel instead of peace, instead of having their own state handed to them on a platter. He's so deluded and out of his mind, this man, that he's willing to see everybody die just to kill the Jews off now. And that's basically what it comes down to. It comes down to a people who are willing to, sell their children, to let their children die, to sell them as martyrs to the Ummah, to the cause, to the jihad, just to kill Jews. Killing Jews is more important than their own lives. And until that changes, you're not going to see a solution. Because until that changes, they're going to continue their jihad. And that's what this is about. Jihad. They're on a mission from God, just like the Blues Brothers were. They're on a mission from God. And people on a mission from God, I guess, are willing to die to the last man, woman, and child. And if you're on a mission from God and willing to die to the last man, woman, and child, well, hey, that's your choice. You made your bed, and it's time to sleep on it. There's real consequences to waging war. And those consequences could be devastating. Look at Gaza. But don't cry and complain about it if this is what you want. If you want to follow God in your jihad, then follow God in your jihad. But if you want peace, return the hostages, reject Hamas, and there will be peace. Okay, let's move on and see what else they have to say.
When you heard that Sinwar, the Hamas leader, had been killed, what were your feelings about that?
Well, when I heard he was killed, of course, it was this is something that was actually, I said, oh, wow, that's actually, he survived all of that. But I think it was a huge mistake by the Israelis to release the footage, because now he's an icon, right?
Is he?
Well, again, someone's terrorist is someone else's hero, right?
Right, but all he did was lob a piece of wood at them. That was it.
Yeah, he was also he was lost an arm and he was there, and it took them 3 tanks to bring down the house. Hey, you can respect your enemy.
But when you saw the footage, for example, of Sinwar in one of the tunnels he'd helped create, spending the billions that have been given to Hamas.
Billions?
Well, they were given billions of dollars. And I would say Netanyahu was quite happy to do that because he wanted to create a split between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. So I'm not.
So why are we blaming Hamas? Why are you not blaming Hamas?
No, I'm just saying that Hamas had an option of how to spend that money.
Yeah,
they were the government in power, and they chose predominantly to spend it on a tunnel system and arming themselves. When you see Sinwar walking through that tunnel safely with his wife and his kids and so on, and there's a load of money next to him.
A load of money?
It was a huge pile of cash next to where he was supposedly sleeping. When you see that, do you not think that he betrayed his own people?
No.
That they weren't able to use these tunnels, the Palestinians.
Well,
he knew when he activated October the 7th and ordered it, what the reaction was likely to be. He was sentencing to death immediately thousands of his own people, none of whom were allowed, apart from the Hamas elements, to use the tunnel system. Is that not a sickening betrayal of his people?
Well, let's talk about the billions of dollars who were what was actually used. I remember a report by Ben Shapiro, and he brought videos of Hamas digging up tubes, water pipes, and then and they're using them as weapons. And they said these are the money that was given to them by the EU, and they squandered. They took the money. But the thing is, what Ben Shapiro didn't say, that he stole that report from Al Jazeera. He removed the narration, and what the narration was said that this was actually pipes that was installed by the Israelis in order to steal the money from Gaza.
Okay, here we go. So now we're getting to Sinwar. The question's real simple. What were your feelings when Sinwar was killed? And what does Bassem say? Bassem says, well, it was a huge mistake that Israel released the footage, because now he's an icon and he's a freedom fighter. So I guess his feelings, he's saying that he's upset is what he's trying to. What he's not saying directly, he's saying he's very upset that Sinwar was killed, because he's a freedom fighter and he's an icon. But he's not being direct. So Piers tries to refocus him because Bassem won't answer simple questions. How did you feel when Sinwar was killed? I felt terrible. I was happy. It was devastating. He won't answer a single question, okay? And when somebody won't answer a single question, it's because they're hiding something. It's because they're hiding something either from his audience or he's hiding something from himself. Here we probably got a bit of both. But so what is Piers tries to bring him back in and says, well, there's this video and it shows him with all this money, and don't you think it was a waste of money? Don't you think Sinwar let his people down by taking the money and pissing it off on missiles and tunnels, while then launching a war which he knew would lead to the deaths of countless of his own people? Does that make him angry? Does he think that's a betrayal? He asks Bassem. And what's Bassem's answer? He says, well, let's talk about Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro? Why are we talking? We're talking about Sinwar and the fact that he was a multi-billionaire and he didn't spend a penny on helping his own people. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about Ben Shapiro. I don't give a crap about Ben Shapiro, what he said or he didn't say, Bassem. We're talking about Yahya Sinwar, the terrorist mastermind who led to the destruction of Gaza and who got filthy rich doing it. A multi-billionaire, people. This man died worth billions of dollars. And when he died, he had millions of dollars in his little tunnel hideout, right? When they finally found his tunnel, he had designer cologne, designer clothes, food. He was living, comparatively speaking, to everybody who's dying right above his head. He was living the safe life. He was hiding out. And so what Bassem's response is to the death is he was a hero. Sinwar was a hero of the people. But he can't really support it. His only evidence of that is, well, Ben Shapiro told a story about some pipes that was a lie. Sorry, Bassem. Sinwar was a criminal gangster terrorist, and he stole billions of dollars from his own people and then led them to their destruction. Okay? And Bassem can't deal with these questions, so he hides from them. He hides from them because Bassem's a coward. Bassem is a coward. Let's see what else he has to say. Maybe he'll be able to answer a question. I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of lying in the thing.
I don't
whole idea.
dispute this line, but what you can't dispute, Bassem, is that clearly since 2005, Hamas has spent a fortune of money they could have spent differently with their people. They spent it on this sophisticated and extensive tunnel system.
The tunnel system that is bigger than the New York subway system?
It would appear so.
450 miles?
I don't know. Do you know how big it is?
450. I mean,
you know?
I think if there's 450 miles underneath the tunnel, we have seen droves and droves of tunnels. What we have seen is small rooms, very, very.
So you don't believe that there is?
No, I don't. No, I don't believe. Of course there are tunnels, but I don't believe that there are like 450 miles because that's ridiculous. You don't want to understand. You tell me that Hamas, under siege, were able to build a subway system bigger than New York in less than 15 years? I don't think.
Did they serve their people, though, with how they spent their money?
I'm not sure. I don't know. And the thing is, like, there's a lot of propaganda. I don't know how much they spend on themselves. I don't know how much they spend on the tunnels. I don't know how much they spend on the people. But the thing is, these are all side talks. The main talk is the daily killing that's happening all through. Like, I mean, yeah, they could be bad people. They could be horrible people. They could be corrupt people.
Could be or are?
They are. Okay? They are horrible. They are vampires. They're zombies.
Do you believe that? Or are you just saying that for performative reasons?
No, I'm saying that because, again, I don't want to go and find the FBI at my door.
But I'd rather you're on it.
Okay, so once again, Piers tries to reel Bassem back in because Bassem starts talking about, the Shapiro guy, and Shapiro's a liar, and so Piers says, well, that's not the question. He says you can't really dispute that Hamas wasted billions of dollars on the tunnel system, right? And Bassem jumps in with more of the same old, and he says that's not true. He said they didn't waste money on tunnels. He said they didn't build 450 miles of tunnels. It can't be that long. It's impossible. We would have seen them all, he says. We would have seen them all? Seriously? Why would we have seen them all, Bassem? They're under the ground. They're hidden by a terrorist organization. They're not publishing where the tunnels are. Israel has destroyed countless, hundreds and hundreds of tunnels. And there still exist hundreds and hundreds of tunnels. And he says, oh, how could Hamas build a tunnel system longer than the New York subway in 15 years? Well, first of all, try 35 years, Bassem. They haven't been in existence only for 15 years. Hamas has been running the game since 1989. And they didn't just start building the tunnels recently. This is a long-term project. And when you say they couldn't have built it, in whatever, how many decades, as big as the New York subway, well, it's not the same thing as a subway. The tunnels aren't as spacious, Bassem, as the New York subway system. They're smaller tunnels. They're big enough to drive a car through. They're big enough to drag missiles through. I mean, you could see the pictures of these tunnels on your screen. You could fit a Humvee through a lot of these tunnels. So, he's grasping at straws. He's a man who's living in an alternate reality where Hamas are as clean as the morning snow, as innocent as, things that are innocent, a morning dove. But he's just deluded. He's deluding himself. He's lying to himself, and he's lying to the people that listen to him. Because he knows what he's saying is just, there's no facts. He says, oh, I only speak with facts. No, he hasn't got a single fact right so far in this debate. He's got the number of dead wrong. He's got, what Hamas has done with their money wrong. He's got it wrong that he said that the Arabs haven't made a single mistake in the past 80 years of this entire conflict, the 1940. Not a single mistake. Okay? I'm sorry. You don't have to be a genius. That's wrong. There have been tons of mistakes on both sides. Tons of mistakes. But to say that you haven't made a mistake, your side hasn't made a mistake, is just delusion. It's la la land. This man lives in la la land. And so then Piers says, well, are they bad? Because Bassem says, yeah, they're just terrible people. They're evil. They're monsters. And Piers says, well, are you being honest, or are you just not being sincere, like you have been this entire debate? And what's Bassem's response? Oh, I'm just saying this to avoid the FBI at my door, which is another hidden Jewish blood libel trope, that if you talk down upon the Jews, they will send the FBI to your door to arrest you, because Jews control the world. Jews control everything. Everything. Which is so ridiculous because, Israel's got 10 million Jews. And they've been around since 48. How are they going to control the most powerful country on the face of the earth? How? The Israeli economy is, the GDP is about $500 billion. That's not even a fraction of the California economy, people. The California economy is 20 times as big as the Israeli economy. The economy in California, one state in America, is 10-20 times bigger than in Israel. But that Israeli, the 10 million Israelis, Jews living in Israel, there's 14 million Jews in the world. And they're not all rich, despite what you might think. They're not. There's a lot of poor Jews living in the world today. Plenty. You go to Israel, the vast majority of Israelis do not own their homes. The vast majority of Israelis rent shitty-ass apartments because they're not that rich. The country is rich. It's a rich little country per capita. For their size, they are a successful country. But Jews, each one of them is not as rich as you think. The average per capita GDP in Israel is only 60,000 US. 60,000 US. That's not wealthy. That's far from wealthy. With the cost of living being what is in Israel, if you're making $60,000 a year, you're living in a 2-3 bedroom apartment if you're lucky, and getting by just to pay your bills. You're not putting money in the bank. No way. And if you got a family, it's even worse. That's for a single person. If two people are making $100,000 a year and they got 2 kids living in Israel, unless you're living on a kibbutzim, in a kibbutz, if you're living in the city, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Jaffa, you're struggling to get by. You're struggling. So anyways, that's what Bassem, he hasn't really had much to offer of substance at all. He hasn't answered a single question. It's been a real weak performance for Bassem. You know, any way you look at it, it's real pathetic stuff. He's just been dishonest. He's avoided the questions. He's avoided the facts, the truth, what's happening. And he's basically, by doing that, see what he's doing is not just, a weak argument. It's really, 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 really detrimental to the Palestinian people. And why is it detrimental? Because it's not going to lead to a peaceful solution. He's saying this is the right road. Keep on it. Don't make a U-turn. Don't turn around. Don't do something differently. Keep going with your jihad, Palestinian people, because it's working out so well for the people of Gaza. You haven't done anything wrong, so keep on going. That's what Bassem's telling the people of Gaza. Keep doing what you're doing. And that's so dangerous, because it's more dangerous when the world is saying that to Gaza, which is what's happening here, right? It's not just Bassem is saying this. It's the world. It's the United Nations. They're all telling the people of Gaza, you're on the right path. And that's freaking crazy. Batshit crazy to say that they're on the right path. They say Palestine will be free. What are you talking about, Palestine will be free? Look at Gaza. Does that look like it's on the verge of being free? What world do you live in that Gaza is on the verge of being free? Who's going to be the government? Hamas? Fatah? Islamic Jihad? Muslim Brotherhood? Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade? Who's going to be the president? Who's going to be... What city's what's the cap? What do you mean Palestine is going to be free? Not until there's peace can you even start talking about having your own state in Palestine. And if you want to get there, two things have to happen. Turn the hostages, reject Hamas. Until that happens, sorry to break it to you, Palestine is just not going to be free. It's that simple. Okay, let's see what else Bassem and Piers have to say.
Punish the Palestinians in the sense that you're exacting retaliation for a heinous terror attack on your people. That's what the Israelis say.
Fine. Okay.
Should they not have responded?
For Israel?
Yeah. On October the 8th, should their response have been to do nothing?
Oh, it's the question of what would I have done, right? Which is one of the craziest questions ever. What would I have done? What would I have done if I magically got teleported into the body of a serial
What should they have
killer?
done?
Well, again, this is asking after the fact, Piers.
But what do you think now, looking back? What would have been a better course of action? Their argument, Israel, is they went after Hamas. They've just taken out the leader of Hamas, who was literally amongst people in Rafah, which was a refugee camp area. That's where he was hiding, and they killed him there. They say that justifies them going into Rafah. It's an arguable point, obviously, but you can't deny that Sinwar was hiding there. They also say that all of what they've been doing is a response to what happened to their people, and that they have to stop the group that did that from doing it again, which they're wedded to doing.
So what is their proportionate response?
Well, that's been the question I've asked for years.
Yeah, but
I don't know the answer.
That question kind of lost its validity after 1 month of the war.
Okay, so the new question is, what should Israel have done in response to October 7th? And big surprise, Bassem does not have a good answer. He doesn't have any answer. He attacks the question. He says that's the craziest question ever. Really? What should Israel have done after October 7th is the craziest question ever? Are you freaking kidding me? What's a better question than what should Israel have done after October 7th? If you're complaining about what Israel's doing now and you have no idea what they should have done, what the hell are you talking about? Get out of my face. Stop talking if you got nothing to say. And Bassem has nothing to say. Then he says, well, what if I was teleported into the body of a serial killer? What the hell are you talking about? Transporting into the body of a serial killer? The question's simple, Bassem. What should Israel have done in response to October 7th? Stood there with their thumb in their butts? Said, hey, they killed a couple, 1,000. They injured 7,000. They got 250 hostages. They said they're going to do this 1,000 times until we're annihilated. But, we'll just see what happens. We'll give them a state. Yeah, that's what we'll give them a state. Here's your state. so you can use it to annihilate us like you promised to do. You know? He can't answer the question. He says, I can't answer this question. It's after the fact. Of course it's after the fact. Because something happened in the past, you can't ask a question about it? What planet are you living on if you can't ask a question about something that happened in the past? Everything's happened in the past. Right now, what I just said a second ago is in the past. You can't ask a question about that because it's in the past? You know, what type of thought is this? What's going on in these people's minds? He says you can't even answer it because by saying you can't answer it, it's after the fact. It's very important. It's very subtle what Bassem's doing. It's saying that there's nothing Israel can do now to extricate itself to solve the problem. The only solution now is to annihilate Israel. And it's very subtle what he did. To say that, you know, I can't answer what Israel should have done now, it's too late. It's what it's saying is Israel's past the point of no return. And now what has to happen is they have to be annihilated. And that's what he's implying in a very subtle, sneaky way. And it's showing who Bassem is. Bassem is Hamas. So Piers asks him again. He keeps trying to rein him in again and again and again. We're kind of going in circles with Bassem just, you know, running away from questions. And Piers saying, well, please just answer the question. I'm begging you, answer the question. What should Israel have done when faced with a terrorist organization wedded to waging jihad and to annihilating your entire country? What's the proportionate response for Israel? What does Bassem say again when he's trying to... That question lost its validity 1 month after the war. What are you talking about? That question lost its validity. How does a question that goes to the heart of a matter lose its validity based on timing? Again, you know, if you're complaining that what Israel's doing is evil, is wrong, you damn well better have an answer to what should Israel have done to do it right. And if you don't, be honest. Say that I want Israel to be annihilated. And that, my friends, is what Bassem believes. And what a lot of people believe. What Hamas believes, what Hezbollah believes, what Iran believes, and what the millions of people around the world, these useful idiots in these left-wing college, universities, Harvard, Yale, and whatever, Brown, Columbia, they want Israel to be annihilated. They just don't want to say it, They want to say they're freedom fighters. They want to say they're anti-Zionists. No. We've heard this before. Stalin, perfected this a long time ago. Back in the 30s and 40s, Stalin perfected the I don't hate Jews, I just hate Zionists, while he murdered 2 million Jews. Okay, so this isn't anything new. This is old hat. This is old stuff here. And, it's history. The same techniques used successfully in history are being used again. And it's not good. It's not good. And what we're hearing from Bassem, is the same level of thought that we're hearing from everybody on the pro-Palestine side. And the sad thing about it, it's the Hamas narrative. It's the Hamas propaganda. So what does this show is happening? Well, it shows us that Hamas propaganda, funded by Iran, Qatar, and Russia, is completely superior to any Hezbollah produced by Israel. The people love to, anytime you're, in favor of the Jews or in Israel, you're a Hezbollah bot, you're a pro-genocide Nazi Hezbollah bot. But hey, the Hezbollah is some weak-ass propaganda, dude. It is weak compared to the Hamas Islamo-Nazi propaganda. They're wiping the floor with Israel in the propaganda department. And it makes sense because they've devoted who knows how much money, their entire military units in Iran for years that are just dedicated to spreading propaganda about Israel throughout the world, getting people used to the idea that Israel are Nazis and we should wipe Israel off the map. And they've been doing this since 1979. This is nothing new. But that propaganda machine is a very well-oiled machine, and it's operating smoothly. So you got to hand it to Hamas. They are winning in that category, no question about it. But can Bassem answer a simple question? You tell me. Put it in the comments. How has he answered any of these questions? I'd love to hear. Okay, and that's going to be it for this segment of the it's so long. I can't keep going and give you more. I'm sure nobody's listening now, but if you want to hear more about this kind of stuff, I'll finish the debate in the next part upcoming. So check back in. Thanks for hanging in there with me, and be safe out there. Be safe out there, people.